Hello, loves. Okay, we're gonna be doing my September wrap up and I have too many books to really hold. I read like 20 books this month, so we have a good chunk of things to get through. Pretty much all of these have also gone into reading vlogs, so I will try and list those in the little thing that comes up here if you're interested, or also I'll try and add them in the description box down below along with links that you can use to get these books if you're interested in any of them. I will be grouping them by vlogs. We'll see how this goes. Now, before we get into all of the books that I ended up reading, information about them, how I felt about them, first, I would like to know what your recent favorite books were. And I will quickly tell you mine, just in case you don't want to sit through the entire thing. These are my top recommendations. Juba, Ring Shout, The Last House on Needless Street, all 5 stars. And then The Death of Jane Lawrence and My Heart is a Chainsaw, both high 4 stars. I did have a really good reading month, so there are actually a couple of other ones that I really enjoyed as well, but these are definitely the top of the top. And then I think that's pretty much it for that, so let's get into the in-depth portion about the 20 books that I read this month. First up, I did a reread of the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. This is an epic fantasy trilogy, the first in the trilogy, basically about a futuristic fantasy world where the 5th season is happening for the last time, so it's kind of an end of day sort of situation, and we have these origins that are not really respected but have these really intense magical powers where they can kind of manipulate the Earth's energy to do different things, and we are following an origin after one of her kids is killed and the other is taken, so she's trying to figure that out while this whole big epic thing is going on at the same time. It's amazing. I annotated it this time and just had a blast, like just really going deep into it and marking it up and making my notes, and just, oh god, I friggin' love this book so much. Still a 5 stars, still highly recommend, and I'm so excited to continue rereading the trilogy. Okay, next up we have a couple of books that I ended up reading for my birthday vlog, or my trying to read 5 books in 5 days. I ended up reading a graphic novel called In Real Life. This is a story about a girl who kind of makes a friendship inside a virtual reality game and realizes the in real life consequences of certain things that are happening, and it was emotional, cute, and enjoyable read overall. I do recommend it. This was a 4 stars. Then I ended up reading Juba by Walter Dean Myers. This is a fiction story about a real person. This is about William Henry Lane, who was a black dancer in the 1800s. The story is really well done, and I was just super engaged and just super interested the whole time. I wasn't expecting to enjoy this as much as I did, and this is definitely another 5 stars for me. I also believe for the same vlog I ended up reading What Should Be Wild by Julia Fine, and this is about a girl who has the magical power that if she touches somebody she can kill them, and then if she touches them again she can bring them back to life, and it's kind of why this is happening to her and some things that happen to her because of it. It is modern time, but there is some past timelines that we jump into as well. This one was pretty interesting. I did enjoy it. I think I ended up giving it like a low 4 stars, high 3 stars. Now moving on to the 2 videos that I did for the Spooky Smart readathon that Jordaline Reads put on at the beginning of the month. In the first one, I ended up reading Ring Shout by Peter Jelliot Clark. This is my 2nd novella by him, and I absolutely adored it. I love his writing, and in this case, I also loved the story, the plot, and the narrative that was going on in this as well. This is a horror novella about a world where there are Ku Klux Klan monsters, and then we have some monster hunters that are trying to deal with that. The writing and imagery, it was just very much a lot. And I really enjoyed it. 5 stars. Wow, I had a lot of really good reads this month, but unfortunately not everything I read fits that. So I guess continuing forward, I then ended up reading Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. This is a story about a girl who ends up in this really exclusive, prestigious school where everybody who goes to that school basically has to say goodbye to the rest of the world and be exclusively at that school for the 3 years that they're there. A lot of the people who have graduated have gone on to do really big, successful things, so it is a highly sought after school, and our main character does not know how she's gotten in there and is kind of just in this haze as she's going through her time at the school and uncovering a little bit more about the school and some of the questionable things that they're doing. This one is a weird one, not everybody's cup of tea. I enjoyed it. I think this is a solid 3 stars. I also ended up reading Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is about a trans boy who wants to be a brujo, but the traditions of his family is getting in the way of him becoming the brujo, so he decides to go behind his family's back with the help of his cousin and do the ritual himself, but in the process he ends up summoning a ghost and having to kind of figure out a big thing that is happening, which I gotta say was a fun time. I really enjoyed this. I think this is probably a solid 4 stars for me. I also ended up reading Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. This is a fun, weird horror novella about a group of girls who end up doing some sort of seance and accidentally summons the Goddess of Filth and have to kind of deal with the consequences and help their friend who is being possessed figure out what's going on. I loved this. It has a lot of weird things. It definitely has some adult themes in it. It is not going to be for everybody. There is a secondary storyline that I found really gross but interesting, and I was glad it was a part of the story, and kind of just wish that it was woven throughout a little bit better than it actually was, and that would probably have made this a 5-star for me, but instead it is a pretty good 4-star. I then ended up reading Ace of Spades by Farida Abiki Iyamidi, and this book, I did not really enjoy it at first, and when I did get into it, the direction that it went, I wasn't super excited about, but once I got on board, I got on board and had quite a wonderful time. I think this is a really strong book and has a really solid message to it. There are some pretty intense arguably over the top things that happen when these 2 kids at this school get targeted by an anonymous bully called Ace of Spades, who is revealing all of their dirty secrets. And it is a lot. I do think people should read it. It's dark academia vibes. It does have some like social commentary in it, and we do have a queer character who is outed, publicly outed because of these events. So there are some really tough topics that are brought up in here. I didn't like the characters at first. It took a while for me to get connected to them and kind of what was going on. I was a little bit annoyed by a lot of the things, but at some point I kind of got more on board and started caring about what was going on and what was happening, and again I ended up really enjoying it, so I think this is 4 stars for me. Then I also was reading How We Fall Apart by Katie Zhao, and I don't think I ever really liked the characters in this story, but I was really invested in what was going on the whole entire time. This is another dark academia story, but in this case we have a murder that ends up taking place, and then we have 4 main suspects and somebody who is slowly spreading their secrets, similar to the last book that I ended up reading. But with this kind of murder mystery going on, there was a lot more to keep me engaged right off the bat, and so I did find myself super gripped. I kept thinking of Pretty Little Liars. I never really got into that show, but I did watch a couple of the episodes, and that intro song is super memorable, and so I kept thinking it while I was reading the book because it just kind of had that vibe overall. I did really enjoy it, and even though there were some issues that I had throughout, I think this is another solid 4 stars for me. Moving on to another vlog that I did. This is the reading horror thriller like Gabby reads, and this vlog was a time. So yes, I ended up reading 3 books that were recommended by Gabby Reads, starting with Stolen Tongues, which I don't have the physical copy anymore because I returned it. This book made me furious. I was so mad at this book. Stolen Tongues is about a couple who ends up going to a cabin for their honeymoon, and some creepy things happen, and spooky vibes, snowed in cabin, something running amok, questionable things, dream stuff. Like there's a lot going on. A good portion of it I really enjoyed. There was so much to it that was really great, and then the author ended up doing some ignorant things along the way and kind of just made it worse and worse. Towards the end, I wasn't happy with the ending. I was livid by some of the reveals that we had gotten beforehand. And then when we got to the author's note after the story, I was even more upset. So much so that it went from a 5 stars to a 2 stars. And the only reason why it's a 2 stars is because I loved the beginning so much. Now, I'm not saying I'm not going to read from this author again in the future. I don't think that they're terrible for writing this book. I just find it in poor taste. It made me feel very upset. I couldn't enjoy it. And I think that there are way better ways to accomplish the exact same thing without it being as problematic as I believed it to be. Again, the writing was great. So there is part of me that's all like, hopefully this author learns from their mistakes, does better in the future, and I can pick them up again and hopefully get a book that I can enjoy all the way through. Some people said that it was slow. I didn't think it was an issue in that realm. It was really just kind of the ignorance that ended up happening towards the latter half of the story. So 2 stars, don't recommend this one in general. But I mean, like, that's up to you. It's not a terrible book, and I don't think the author purposefully was being awful. So that's something to keep in mind. If you can get past that, then yeah, I was so mad though. I was livid, so I couldn't enjoy the book after things happened. Then next up, I ended up reading Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky, and this is a chunker. I really liked a lot of what this story was doing, but I found myself just getting bored, and so I really think this probably would have been stronger if it wasn't so long, because there was a lot of cool things in it. Like, I think it did some fun stuff. Imaginary Friend is about a boy who gets lost in the woods for like 6 days, and nobody knows what's going on, and when he comes back, some questionable things start happening, and it kind of gets weirder and weirder and weirder as we progress. A lot of stuff happens. I do think it was all pretty cool for the most part, but it was too much. It took too long. It got a little boring at some times. I don't know. So I think this one is a high 3 stars for me. And then the last book that I tried to tackle for that vlog, and my first DNF of the month, was The Troop. So this book, there's nothing wrong with it. It just really wasn't for me. It's a group of boys who are basically on an island for a Boy Scout? Boy Scout? Is that what it's called? Wow, for some sort of Boy Scout event where they are, you know, trying to navigate the wilderness for a week or something like that. And some random dude manages to make his way to the island, and he is horribly sick. He comes on, he's like eating dirt, he's saying that he's super hungry, there seems to be something seriously wrong with him, and the man who is overseeing the Boy Scout thing is also a doctor, so he decides to try and help this man. I'm pretty sure, I don't know, I didn't get this far, but I'm pretty sure there is some sort of sickness that spreads, and it's got creepy things and stuff happens, and, you know, body horror and all kinds of stuff like that. I didn't get that far because I was not enjoying it. I was not enjoying it at all, and so I ended up DNFing it. I didn't like the boys. I didn't like the general story. I didn't feel weird or creepy about what was going on. I had a decent idea of what we were to expect, and I just didn't care. But that's on me. So yeah, that's it for that vlog. Then the next vlog that we just went up is the reading horror and thriller from the library. And in that one, I started off reading The Last House on Needless Street by Caitlin Ward. And I love this. This is a story about the last house on Needless Street where some people end up living there. One of those people was accused of doing something terrible. There's somebody who moves into the area who's trying to figure out if that's actually what happened and what's going on at the last house in Needless Street, and we're following the perspective of a couple of people from the last house on Needless Street. And it was a wild ride. I really enjoyed it. I think it did really well. I appreciate what the author was trying to do. There are some things that I don't necessarily qualify to say if it was done well or not, but overall, I had a good time. I was interested in finding out what was happening. I enjoyed the twists. I recommend you go in without reading the flap if possible, because I think the flap is kind of lame. And it's better going in knowing as little as possible. So I ended up giving this 5 stars, and I hope to eventually get a copy of this that I can annotate and reread in the future. Next up, I ended up reading The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. And this is a story about a woman who is on hard times, who gets a letter about an inheritance that she's all like, oh shoot, wrong person. And then she's all like, well, I'm struggling. Maybe I can try and see if I can get that inheritance. And she goes to try and steal this inheritance from somebody and starts discovering some weird ass shit. And it was a good time. I did really enjoy this. I didn't love it per se, but the more I think back to the things that are going on in the story, the more I'm all like, yeah, that was cool. That was a good time. So this is a good 4 stars at this point. I then ended up reading 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. This is a story about 9 people who get a letter that has 9 names on them, and the people on the list start dying one by one, basically, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, why they're on this list, what's happening. I do think that the twist was interesting, the general story was interesting, and you know, what happened, why things were going on was interesting. I did like that. I, in general, though, didn't like the process of finding out what was going on. I think I may have only finished this because I was listening to the audiobook while I was doing other stuff. And so it was just kind of on in the background. So it was enjoyable, technically, but I don't necessarily know if I loved the writing and the build-up and the setup and all of that stuff. I ended up giving this objectively a 3 star because I don't think there was anything wrong with it, but kind of a 2 star because I didn't like it. So for me, I kind of want to be like 2 stars. This isn't one that I really enjoyed, but there's nothing wrong with it. So I'm on the fence of a 3 star. Because like I liked bits of it even though I didn't like the experience. So this one's somewhere between a 2 and a 3 star. Which brings me to the last book of that vlog and our next DNF, which is Sundial by Katrina Ward. This is another book that I'm sure was probably fine, but I just did not enjoy the process. And this was really sad for me because I enjoyed her other book so much. I had given this a 5 star. So I was all like, I'm gonna love Sundial. It's a newer book from her. It's gonna be a good time. But this is about a woman who has 2 daughters and a shit relationship with her husband, and one of her daughters does something pretty bad and is a kind of questionable kid in general. And so she decides that she's going to take her daughter to her house on an estate that she owns that is called Sundial. Her family calls it Sundial. And so she takes her daughter to Sundial to have some bonding and to have a conversation to try and make sure that she doesn't do anything like she did again. And while we're there, we end up getting some information about her childhood and what things were like on Sundial. We do get a couple of chapters in the perspective of her questionable daughter, and you know, we get some perspectives of her in the now as she's dealing with these certain things that are currently happening. And I'm vaguely interested in figuring out, you know, what's going on, but there wasn't a thread to completely keep me engaged. And so I was bored, I was tired, I just wasn't in the mood, and I didn't want to force it. So 100 and something pages into it, I decided to DNF it, and I may or may not give it another shot in the future, but probably not. Okay, and this is on to the part of the video where we're going to go through a couple of books that are going to be in future vlogs that are not out yet. So these are the books in question. I'm not going to say what vlogs they're for, but yeah, I did end up reading Bunny by Mona Awad. This is a story about a girl who ends up at a school where there is this group of girls that she calls the bunnies because they call each other Bunny. And she's kind of jealous of them, and at some point she kind of ends up in their group and weird things happen. There's this kind of culty, witchy sort of thing going. My light died. Uh-oh. There's this like culty witchy thing kind of going on, and a lot of questionable stuff happening and trying to figure out what's going on. It's a fever dream. It's weird. It was a good time. It was a high 3 stars for me. I also ended up reading Sadie by Courtney Summers. This was one of the tabletop TBR picks that I ended up getting for September, and this is about a girl who goes missing after her sister is murdered. And you have a guy who's part of a podcast who is investigating it, along with a couple of snippets of the girl herself, Sadie. And this one definitely has some trigger warnings that you should look into. There are some tough topics that are discussed in this. It was a fascinating audiobook experience. Highly recommend. It's a full cast, and they've got little radio / podcast snippets that were just a fun time to listen to. And I'm usually not somebody who likes full cast audiobooks, so yeah, I thought it was really, really enjoyable. Highly recommend, even though the book itself was a little hard. And this one I would give a high 4 stars. I also ended up reading The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. This is a gothic horror with creepy aspects, and it's pretty much about a woman who ends up in a marriage of convenience. She ends up going to her husband's estate, which was the one thing he told her not to do, and finds him terrified and basically just not the man she thought he was, and is starting to discover a lot of weird, creepy things about him and the estate and his past and stuff going on. It was a wild, creepy ride. There was, you know, some spooky elements to it, some questionable things going on. I overall enjoyed it. I didn't love it, which was annoying because it has everything that I should love, but I don't know. I feel like towards the end I was like, yeah, that was good, but I wasn't like, yes, this is the best, even though I do love the vibes and the writing and a lot of the weird, creepy things that was going on. So this one is definitely a high 4 stars. I also ended up reading My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, and this one I admittedly was not expecting to enjoy. I ended up reading another book by him that I was kind of all like about, but I've been wanting to read more of his work regardless, and I'm so glad that I did because this was great. This is about a girl who is obsessed with slasher stories, and at some point she thinks that a slasher has made its way to her town, and she is trying to basically warn everybody, but because of the nature of how she is, it's a struggle. And so you end up hearing a lot a lot of her talking about slashers. There are these snippets of these essays that she wrote going deep into makeup of slashers and how she feels about certain things and the way things are designed, and it's a really fun time. I really enjoyed this. This isn't my favorite, even though part of me almost wants to give it 5 stars anyway, but I think instead it's a really high 4 stars. It was a wild ride. I kind of wish there was a little bit more going on, or certain things happened a little bit sooner. I do feel like some of the ending felt a little bit rushed, but again, it was fun. It was fun. I didn't love the main character, and there are certain things that happened that I wasn't a fan of, but I still enjoyed the book. So yeah, and I think this is another one. It is a slasher. Yeah, but maybe trigger warnings if you need it as well. And that is all of the books that I have completed in September. I am working on one more book right now, but I do not believe I'll be able to finish it tonight. So this is everything for now. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to thumbs up. Let me know in the comments section down below. Subscribe, hit that bell notification. Let me know what your favorite reads were, and I will catch you in the next video. Until then, bye!